How do two theories we've looked at so far help us understand the Ukraine conflict?
The liberal internationalist analysis is pretty straightforward, and it has a powerful moral component.
If I go through it quickly, it's because it's already the analysis that Americans are the most familiar with.
Countries should be able to determine their own future. Ukraine has chosen to throw its lot in with NATO.
And it is both right and appropriate for the United States and our democratic allies to defend its ability to do so. Any country that does not play by those rules, like Russia, is simply wrong, and the United States and allies will need to make them get with the program. Okay, that's the liberal internationalist view. How do realists see the situation?
Realists wouldn't deny that Russian leader Vladimir Putin is an authoritarian, nor would they deny his lack of respect for international law. But they'd point out that it is an unfortunate fact that many, many world leaders are authoritarians without respect for human rights, and the United States can't make it our role to rid the world of all of them.
Here's some recent history of the conflict that realists see as relevant.
NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was founded in 1949 during the Cold War, and its explicit primary purpose was to be a counterweight to defend countries against possible aggression by the Soviet Union and its allies in the Warsaw Pact.
Given that, when the Soviet Union dissolved, we might have expected a conversation about what, if any, purpose NATO continued to serve, or if it no longer served any purpose, if it should be shut down. Guess it's closing time.
Yeah. Instead, NATO began expanding, including incorporating some of the Soviet Union's former satellite, thus expanding NATO right to the edge of the Russian border. This was a policy that realists warned at the time was an unwise one.
The Clinton administration did not take this advice, nor did the next president.
In 2008, President George W. Bush nominated Georgia and the Ukraine for membership in NATO. The idea was criticized by most European members of NATO,
as well as by members of the U.S. security establishment. A compromise was reached where these nations were considered to be on the path to future NATO membership,
but without announcing any specific date when this would occur. This may have been the worst possible outcome, since it meant at some indeterminate time in the future, Georgia and Ukraine would be protected by the Mutual Defense Clause, but that at the current time they were not. Why did realists think that NATO membership for these countries would be problematic? Because Russia, like all great powers, would be extraordinarily alarmed by possibly hostile forces on their border. Look at it this way. If Russia or China was to sign a military alliance with countries in the Western Hemisphere, neighbors of the United States,
and perhaps put troops or missiles in these countries,
how would the United States react? How should the U.S. react? That's a hypothetical, but we know it did happen when a U.S. rival allied with a nation in the Caribbean and put arms there. President Kennedy demanded that the Soviet Union remove these missiles from Cuba, and he was willing to risk a nuclear confrontation to accomplish this goal.
That's just the most dramatic example of a long history of the United States maintaining that the Western Hemisphere is our sphere of influence. The United States has made it clear that we consider that we have a right to intervene in countries in Latin America, but
Other powers do not. To step out of the realist role for a moment, I don't myself believe that because the United States has intervened in countries near us, that gives Russia the right to do the same. But we should be aware of how this may appear hypocritical to Russia. It's worth keeping that history in mind when we try to understand Russia's recent vehement objections to NATO membership for Georgia or Ukraine. We continue in part 2.